Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine standing at a metro station, outskirts of Sunderland, just 2 days before a huge national vote.
Right.
You're talking to a man waiting for his train, and you ask him how he's going to vote. He tells you he's decided, largely based on something he saw, well, on Facebook.
On Facebook, yeah.
Yeah,
About Turkey joining the EU, millions of workers coming over.
exactly. And that story right there from the source material we're diving into today, it's basically where this whole investigation kicked off.
And that voter's choice, swayed by something on a phone screen.
Okay.
It really set the stage, didn't it? Sunderland went over 60% leave.
A massive result.
Part of that huge upset that just stunned everyone, changed the UK completely.
Absolutely. And that moment, that one voter, a referendum potentially turning on a Facebook post, playing on fear, it crystallizes what we're getting into today.
Yeah.
We're looking at some of the hidden forces really reshaping modern democracy, specifically the rise of what gets called dark money and digital disinformation.
And using the UK's Brexit referendum as a kind of key case study.
A really eye-opening one, frankly. And our insights, they're mainly drawn from Peter Geoghegan's book, Democracy for Sale.
Yeah, it's a proper deep dive into how money, tech, and these rapidly changing political tactics are forging a new normal.
Right. So our mission here is to really unpack the key stuff from the book, to understand how these forces connect, why it matters to you listening now.
And how they might be working away, under the surface of politics, not just in the UK, but it seems increasingly everywhere.
It's like understanding the hidden plumbing, right? What makes the system tick, or maybe what makes it vulnerable.
Exactly. And the book argues that with Brexit, British politics really saw the American model.
Yeah.
Hidden finance, clandestine influence, properly cross the Atlantic.
That's interesting because U.S. campaign finance, you think vast sums, hundreds of millions.
Right.
But the book points out the UK context is different. Spending limits are much lower.
Yeah, comparatively tiny. But even small amounts here, say £50,000 for a private dinner with the PM.
That buys real access.
Remarkable access, apparently. Disproportionate influence compared to what you'd need in the U.S.
So the book outlines this dark money playbook.
That's the term.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not just about, outright breaking rules. It's finding ways around them,
Okay.
exploiting murky financing channels, and crucially, relying on networks, supportive networks.
Think tanks, sympathetic media outlets, maybe controlled by a few powerful players.
Highly organized political groups within the main parties, that kind of thing.
And the book stresses this isn't just a British thing anymore.
No, it's gone global. This playbook is popping up everywhere.
And in the impact. The book says even these smaller sums can seriously shift the political direction.
Yeah, they let relatively small, focused groups push for policy changes in ways that are really hard for the public to see or challenge.
Like the no-deal Brexit example.
Exactly. That went from seeming pretty fringe in 2016 to, almost explicit government policy by 2019. The book connects that shift to a network of often corporate-funded libertarian think tanks, many with transatlantic links.
And this ties into digital disinformation.
Deeply. Dark money pays to push the messages. And the digital world, it's the perfect amplifier.
Creates echo chambers, spreads falsehoods like wildfire.
Conducts political chat away from the public eye, all boosted by the tech platforms themselves.
It really is a massive shift in how politics is even communicated, increasingly through Silicon Valley giants.
And the book suggests that once politicians see how powerful these digital tools can be, very few are willing to disarm. They grab any advantage online.
Okay, so who are the key players the book focuses on for Brexit?
Well, you've got the official campaign, Vote Leave, led by people like Matthew Elliott and Dominic Cummings.
Right.
And then their unofficial, maybe more provocative rivals, Leave.eu, fronted by Aaron Banks.
And later on, the book mentions Nigel Farage's Brexit Party, too.
Yeah, as an early example of a sort of digital party in the UK, maybe inspired by things like Italy's Five-Star Movement.
Okay, let's start with Vote Leave then. Lots of people wanted to leave the EU for years, but these guys, Elliott and Cummings, they actually pulled it off.
Yeah, often against the odds, or what people thought were the odds.
So, Matthew Elliott, who is he? Described as a committed free marketer, staunch Eurosceptic, founded the Taxpayers Alliance.
You've probably heard of them. Became quite a big operation. But the book notes it seemed underpinned by, dark money. Elliott refused to name donors, citing anonymity rights.
And the Taxpayers Alliance wasn't alone.
No, part of that whole network of libertarian, often climate skeptic outfits, many based at that famous address, 55 Tufton Street in Westminster.
Ah, Tufton Street.
And Eliot had strong transatlantic links, too. Hosted events with U.S. libertarians, Tea Party figures. The connections are really important here.
And Dominic Cummings. The book paints him as, what, pugilistic, controversial?
Divisive, definitely.
Yeah.
But also seen as very talented. Strong Eurosceptic background, too. And crucially, he'd won a referendum before.
Ah, the Northeast Regional Assembly vote in 2004.
That's the one. He apparently called it a training exercise for the EU vote.
You can see the tactics maybe echoing, negative ads, stunts.
Yeah, the inflatable white elephant, things like that.
Yeah.
He also tried, though failed, to set up a UK version of the U.S. Heritage Foundation.
Right. Now, vote leave spending. This is where the book digs into bending the rules.
Absolutely. They ran what the book calls faux grassroots groups, basically fronts, catchy names, designed by a former Cambridge Analytica consultant.
Like Believe, the youth group.
Exactly, run by Darren Grimes. And in the final weeks, Vote Leave gave Believe a huge donation, £675,000.
Wow, that's serious money in UK terms.
Very significant. But here's the crucial bit, the rule bending. The money didn't actually land in Believe's bank account.
Oh, where'd it go?
VoteLeave paid it directly to Aggregate IQ, that Canadian data firm they were using heavily.
I see. So it bypassed Believe entirely.
And the book highlights this wasn't declared as joint working between VoteLeave and Believe, which the Electoral Commission later said breached spending rules.
And the fallout from that got messy, didn't it?
Yeah. Grimes was fined initially, but that was overturned on appeal. VoteLeave helped fund his case. VoteLeave itself eventually dropped its own appeal against the Electoral Commission, paid a fine, plus about £200 in legal costs.
And a police investigation.
Was ongoing when the book was written. Moving very slowly, the book notes, with police apparently citing political sensitivities.
Interesting. So Cummings was open about their strategy, though.
Pretty open, yeah. Claimed 98% of their final marketing budget went on Facebook.
98%.
Their goal was massive. Send 1.5 billion messages, videos, to maybe 7 million swing voters, codename Waterloo.
1.5 billion?
They spent over 3.6 million just on Facebook via Aggregate IQ, that firm that seemed to come out of nowhere, as one expert put it.
And they used data hard, ran online contests to get info from people who don't usually follow politics.
Yeah, which actually got them fined by the data regulator for sending spam texts. The book does note Remain spent heavily too, but suggests VoteLeave had a much freer reign, maybe fewer internal party arguments.
And the messaging itself, often misleading.
Often based on targeted digital misinformation, yeah. While Remain pushed a positive case, VoteLeave hammered things like the Turkey joining the EU fear.
Yeah.
Every week was Turkey week, apparently.
Even though the UK had a veto.
Right. But these emotive images, these claims, they popped up privately on people's social media feeds. The book calls it an invisible conversation conducted away from the media's prying eyes.
And Aggregate IQ, that Canadian firm, it got tangled up in the Cambridge Analytica scandal.
Deeply linked. Close ties to SCL, KM's parent company, and SCL specialized in psychological operations psyops, using info to influence behavior.
Cambridge Analytica, they were the ones harvesting data from millions on Facebook without consent.
That's them. Led to a huge $5 billion fine for Facebook in the U.S. Cam bosses apparently bragged about working in hundreds of elections worldwide.
So the UK Parliament looked into this, the fake news inquiry.
Yeah, chaired by Damien Collins. They saw VoteLeave's actions, the law-breaking, as just a tiny example of something that is easily achievable at scale. They called it importing cutting edge of American techniques.
But the committee didn't have much power.
Limited powers, yeah. Couldn't force witnesses. Cummings himself was found in contempt for not showing up.
And then became the PM's top advisor.
Exactly. The book suggests a wider reluctance in Britain to really investigate the referendum lawbreaking. Some apparently dismissed concerns as sour grapes, displacement activity.
And referendum law itself isn't scrutinized as much as general election law.
Seems that way, yeah. Bit of a blind spot.
So the key takeaway on VoteLeave from the book isn't just the rule-breaking, but how they used digital platforms, data firms,
to bypass traditional methods, bypass scrutiny, operate in that invisible space, hitting voters with emotional, often dodgy messages.
Right. Showing just how effective a boundary-pushing, data-driven digital campaign could be. Okay, let's pivot to the other side of Leave. Aaron Banks and Leave.eu presented as, what, the more aggressive ones?
Yeah, the book definitely paints them that way. Nicknamed the provisional wing of the Leave campaign by some.
More controversial.
And Banks himself Quite a character.
A very colorful figure in the story. The book goes into his background, South Africa, early political tries, linking up with Mark Fulbrook.
Who later advised Boris Johnson.
That's right. And some discrepancies noted in how Banks described his early business life.
His money came mainly from selling his insurance business, Brightside.
Seems largely from that, yeah. A reported £12 million payout.
And he used offshore structures, the Panama Papers.
Revealed in the Panama Papers, yeah. He reportedly brushed it off, saying he didn't give a monkeys as long as he paid UK tax. His insurance underwriter also hit regulatory problems in Gibraltar, needed a complex bailout.
Then he became a big political donor to UKIP.
Huge donor to UKIP, yeah. Over £1 million initially, then loans totaling over £3 million. Apparently, after feeling snubbed by the Conservatives. And that bought him recognition, media profile.
Definitely raised his profile, got him noticed. But it also raised questions. Where did all this money really come from?
Which led the Electoral Commission to call in the National Crime Agency, the NCA.
Yep. The NCA investigated specifically if Banks was the true source of the campaign funds.
And they found?
Ultimately, no evidence of criminal offenses or third-party funding for his Brexit campaign.
But the ruling itself was significant.
Very significant, as the book points out. The NCA found the campaign was funded via his company in the Isle of Man, Rock Holdings.
Okay.
And that was ruled technically legal because Banks, as a British voter, was the ultimate beneficial owner of that offshore company.
Ah, so that's the loophole.
Exactly. The book calls it an apparent weakness in the law. It seems to allow money from offshore companies into UK politics, potentially overseas funds, as long as the person owning the company is a permitted UK donor.
Are there other examples of this?
The book mentions Lord Ashcroft using companies in Belize. Transparency International is quoted saying the rules against foreign funding are basically non-existent.
So, no crime found in Banks' case, but the system itself seems flawed.
That's the implication. It exposed a major potential route for opaque offshore money.
And Leave.eu's campaign style, aggressive.
Very. The book talks about an intense workplace culture. Staff felt pretty much nothing that we weren't encouraged to say. Banks himself reportedly said their output wasn't meant to be informative, it was propaganda.
There was that awful incident around Joe Cox's murder, too.
Yeah, deeply disturbing. While campaigns publicly paused, the book says Banks privately emailed staff the morning after, telling them to keep pumping Brexit ads on Facebook, press it harder, boost it more.
And they drafted a press release blaming the media?
In the name of Labour Leave, who shared their office, attacking the media for politicizing the murder. Channel 4 reported on it later.
And their digital tactics, staging fake videos.
Fake videos of migrants, yeah, which some outlets reported as real. Steve Bannon's quoted saying their focus on immigration was crucial.
They targeted MPs, too.
Liberal conservative MPs, yeah, with Facebook ads, reportedly led to abuse, threats. One man was jailed for threatening Anna Soubry.
Did they get into trouble with data regulators?
Yes. Fined £120,000 by the ICO for using campaign emails for insurance marketing and using customer details from Banks' insurance firm for political messages. Banks had denied sharing data.
And the Cambridge Analytica link, Banks said he hired them.
He wrote that in his book, yeah. But later claimed he didn't actually use them, citing concerns about their methods being illegal. It's a bit murky.
But CAM staff ended up working elsewhere in the ecosystem.
2 senior CAM data scientists later worked for Thomas Borwick's College Green, another firm involved.
What about the Russian links? There was lots of speculation.
Banks and his team seemed to almost enjoy it.
Yeah.
He met the Russian ambassador, claimed his wife wanted to meet the diaspora, but she wasn't there. His wife had that XMI5 SPY license plate, the 007 email.
But the NCA found no Russian funding evidence.
Not relating to his campaign funding, no.
Banks himself, quite combative with journalists.
Very truculent, yeah. Attacked them on Twitter. Spoof videos. The book suggests he kind of embodied that aggressive post-referendum mood.
So the Leave.eu story highlights aggressive digital tactics, misleading content.
And crucially, how the current legal framework seems to allow huge sums in via offshore structures, blurring lines between personal wealth, business, and politics.
And the book flags a bigger issue from both campaigns, spending before the official regulated period starts.
Yeah, that's a massive blind spot. Campaigns can spend heavily gathering data, shaping opinion, long before the short official period kicks in. That's where a lot of the action happens, largely unregulated. Data use, too.
Right. If you can spend unlimited amounts prepping the ground.
The regulated period might be too late to matter as much. It all happens away from scrutiny.
Okay, let's shift focus to another key group the book examines. The European Research Group, the ERG. and think tanks.
Right, the ERG. Started small back in the 90s. Eurosceptic conservative MPs opposing the Maastricht Treaty, described as a sort of rebel army alongside groups like the Bruges Group.
But it really changed after the 2015 election and the referendum.
Massively. It became this highly organized, very vocal force pushing for a hard Brexit, hugely influential in bringing down Theresa May.
Members constantly on TV, seen as spokespeople.
Yeah, key Brexiteers who joined Vote Leave were also linked to the ERG. After the vote, the book says it was kind of taken over as an already existing vehicle, especially by people like Steve Baker.
And it morphed into a sort of no-deal Brexit sect.
That's how some described it. Baker is portrayed as a sharp political operator, very organized, understood the conservative mind, really transformed the ERG.
Using modern tools like WhatsApp groups for coordination.
Apparently, yeah. Very active group. Baker himself described as a born-again Christian, follower of Austrian economics, big on deregulation, even things like asbestos. Member of the Freedom Association, too.
And their funding. Controversial.
Right.
Opaque.
Both. Partly public money. MPs claiming expenses for pooled research. But Open Democracy found they were hiding ERG payments under that vague label. Hiding in plain sight, the book calls it.
A legal case forced some disclosure eventually.
Some research had to be released, yeah. But crucially, the ERG is an unincorporated association.
Meaning?
Like Richard Cook's CRC that funded the DUP. It doesn't have to publish accounts or list its members.
So, huge influence, little oversight on funding.
Pretty much. They claim to have separate bank accounts for public funds and private donations, but the opacity remains.
And they got close to the DUP.
Very close. Nigel Dodds, the DUP leader, often at ERG meetings. The DUP chief of staff even joined ERG staff. Richard Cook, head of the CRC, was in that ERG WhatsApp group praising Baker.
And their agenda, hard Brexit, U.S. trade deal, linked to American libertarianism.
Strongly.
Yeah.
The book describes their vision as Singapore on steroids. ERG leaders made frequent trips to the U.S.
This transatlantic connection keeps coming up. Liam Fox.
Yeah, frequent visitor to the Heritage Foundation in D.C. Strong ties to the old Atlantic Bridge Group, which promoted Anglo-American relations and was linked to allies in the U.S.
Atlantic Bridge paid for Tory flights to the U.S.
Its U.S. charity did, yeah. After Brexit, Fox became trade secretary, pushed the U.S. deal, met the Heritage president who'd been on the Atlantic Bridge board.
Steve Bannon claimed he tried to broker a deal.
Claimed he tried with Fox and May's team, but found them extremely mediocre. Later, 45 Republican senators wrote to Johnson backing a no-deal trade pact.
So the book really emphasizes the role of think tanks in all this, especially the libertarian ones in London.
Definitely. That concentration around 55 Tufton Street, promoting open markets, but very secretive about their own funding.
Unlike maybe left-centrist ones that rely more on public or trust funding.
Yeah, the book calls it an asymmetry in funding. Critics argue these opaque ones are basically PR agencies or lobby groups for corporate interests, not neutral research bodies.
And this connects to that dark money playbook idea from the U.S., Richard Fink advising the Koch brothers.
Exactly. Fund think tanks, citizens groups, fringe movements, methodically shift policy rightwards. The book argues that model landed in the UK.
Where maybe smaller sums have an even bigger impact, making the UK potentially even more vulnerable to corporate capture.
That's the argument. And the Institute of Economic Affairs, the IEA, is presented as a key example.
Founded way back in 1955, inspired by Hayek.
Yeah, aiming to change politicians' thinking towards free markets. Set up as a charity, deliberately cagey, trying to look neutral. But critics now call it a lobby group.
And they don't name donors.
Refuse to. But it's known they've taken money from tobacco, gambling, offshore finance, oil companies like BP, Tate & Lyle.
You had an anti-EU stance.
Yes. There's an example where an unnamed donor gave $15K for IEA research, cited by a minister for a policy that later got dropped.
And U.S. money flows into these UK groups, too.
The book mentions the Charles Koch Foundation, giving $300 to spike that site, run by ex-revolutionary communists, now pushing pro-corporate, anti-green views.
Shankar Singham gets mentioned a lot, the Brexiteer's brain.
That's how he's described. Worked at Legatum Institute, then the IEA. Called a top trade lawyer, though some U.S. sources apparently downplayed that.
But he got amazing access to ministers. Gove, Davis, Johnson, Fox.
Multiple meetings. Got appointed to Liam Fox's expert trade committee, though resigned after taking a lobbying job. Close friend of Steve Baker, very influential in the ERG. They used his ideas heavily.
He was behind the Alternative Arrangements Commission for the Irish border.
The animating spirit, yeah. Set up with Prosperity UK, proposed tech solutions, special economic zones, even airships.
Airships, seriously.
Despite the Irish weather, yes. Hailed as bipartisan, but local businesses apparently said it misrepresented reality and ignored them. The tech panel included people with commercial interests in customs tech.
Did it gain traction?
Johnson endorsed it. But ultimately, the Irish Sea border plan took over. Critics felt the real goal was pushing a U.S. trade deal, not solving the border issue.
And the IEA is good at getting media coverage.
Very adept. They boast a huge advertising value equivalent from small budgets. An academic study showed conservative think tanks were getting twice as much BBC airtime by 2015.
Providing voices on controversial stuff.
Exactly.
So the takeaway here is opaque funding, often corporate or transatlantic libertarian money, fuels these networks.
Think tanks, political groups like the ERG, who then push specific policies, gain huge influence through access and media, all with minimal transparency.
Right. Let's go back to the digital side then. Cambridge Analytica, that scandal became shorthand for political manipulation globally, didn't it?
Absolutely. The book mentions CEO Alexander Nix boasting about psychographics, fake bribery stings using sex workers. Whistleblower Chris Wiley exposed the Facebook data harvesting.
And Cam was linked to SCL, that private military contractor doing psyops.
Yeah, that connection is highlighted. Cam bosses apparently boasted about working in hundreds of elections.
The book questions how effective Cam really was, though. Maybe partly hype.
It touches on that debate, were they geniuses or hucksters? But it stresses the real point is they could operate like that, push boundaries without censure. What that says about modern politics.
And it wasn't just Cam doing digital manipulation.
Far from it. The book gives examples like the conservatives setting up fake websites, one mimicking the Labor Manifesto, paying Google to rank it high.
And rebranding their Twitter account as a fact-checker during a debate.
That too, yeah. Quickly called out, but done nonetheless. The book argues the main effect isn't always persuasion, it's undermining trust.
Making voters unsure what's real when they're bombarded with info and misinformation.
Exactly. That feeling of overwhelmed, unsure what is real and what is not.
And the scale is huge, spreading industrially across all platforms with almost no oversight.
That's the picture painted. The lack of information is the scariest thing. How the UK system seems to be importing US-style problems many thought couldn't happen here.
The book traces these dark arts back quite far to Edward Bernays.
Yeah, a century ago, applying psychology to marketing, politics, market research, emotional appeals, tailoring messages, an engineering approach.
And digital campaigning just accelerated all that. Obama campaigns were pioneer.
There were. Then UK parties caught on. Tories spending big on Facebook in 2015. Then Vote Leave pushed it further illegal funding, falsehoods like the 350 meters for NHS claim.
And the platform algorithms might have helped, boosting emotional, negative stuff.
The book suggests Facebook's algorithms likely favored one side's more engaging, perhaps more outrageous content.
Then the 2019 election, described as the dirtiest British election, ruthless Tory campaign.
Under Isaac Levito, yeah. Doctored videos, anonymous WhatsApps targeting specific communities like Hindus, misleading Facebook memes.
And even with fact-checkers working flat out.
The disinformation spreads anyway, creates this chaotic void.
This connects to those hyper-partisan news sites, like Politically.
Exactly. Sites focusing on emotional triggers, immigration, religion, Brexit drama, growing via targeted Facebook promotion.
Politically got banned by Facebook eventually for hate speech.
Yes, lost its audience and funding, rebranded as Britain's most censored. Others mentioned are Brexit Central, Westminster, The Canary, Squawkbox, left and right.
And their method isn't always outright lies.
Often genuine content taken out of context, the book says. Then algorithms push users towards more extreme stuff. YouTube suggestions, Facebook feeds.
Feeding our biases, wanting confirmation.
Tapping right into that. Providing a hermetically sealed worldview, plus a social side, finding your tribe online, getting that dopamine hit from engagement.
Run by canny entrepreneurs who get the new online news game.
Seems so. And the book links them to the traditional tabloid press, too. They see themselves as inheritors of that culture. Murdoch's Euroscepticism, press ownership concentration.
Only 3 companies controlling over 80% of the UK press market. Owners' agendas matter.
Hugely. Political reporting itself has changed, too, hasn't it? More dramatic, personality-driven, Boris or Jeremy.
Encouraging cynicism. They're all liars anyway.
That attitude. Journalists' struggle can get manipulated by politicians expert at framing narratives that spread online.
After Johnson won in 2019, more anonymous briefings, Cummings suspected.
Lots of leaks, yeah. Stories about collusion probes, Claims about Merkel or Varadkar,
Hmm.
often debunked later, but the damage done.
Like Farage claiming the BBC treated him like a war criminal,
Yeah,
picked up everywhere.
exactly. Amplifies the media bias's narrative. The book says it's relentless because it works.
And the result? Easier for politicians to bend the truth? Dismiss criticism as fake news?
Pretty much. Established truth sources are weakened. Fewer sheer facts makes democracy incredibly difficult.
Okay, stepping back again. The book connects all this dark money, digital tricks, partisan media to a wider trend across Europe.
Yes, the rise of nationalist populist leaders.
Mhm.
Salvini in Italy, Orban in Hungary.
Using identity politics, culture wars, race, gender, environment.
Exactly. And benefiting from transnational funding and networks.
Like the World Congress of Families,
Right.
U.S.-Russian ultra-conservative group.
Very influential in the European far right, the book says. Met in Verona, Salvini attended. Agenda: natural family, fighting demographic winter. Described by watchdogs as an anti-LGBT hate group.
Salvini himself, master of social media.
A chameleon, the book calls him. Uses religious language, plays strongman against minorities, bans rescue boats, relies heavily on Facebook. Thank God for the internet, he said. That mix of online support helped his party surge.
And Orban in Hungary, defending Christian Europe.
Restrictive laws, demonizing LGBT people, tight control of media, civil society, similar rhetoric in Poland's Law and Justice Party Rainbow Plague, strong support from some religious groups, links back to U.S. evangelicals.
So, significant U.S. ultra-conservative money flowing into Europe.
Tens of millions, the book estimates. Backing anti-LGBT, anti-abortion campaigns, lobbying the EU, funding grassroots groups, donors like the Prince family mentioned, groups like Alliance Defending Freedom linked to Trump's team.
Steve Bannon tried to set up a network, too.
His Academy for the Judeo-Christian West. Linked to anti-abortion groups, close to the Acton Institute that mixes free markets and social conservatism, gets cuck funding. Bannon wanted to be a transatlantic broker.
What about Citizen Go, another transnational group?
Yes, ultra-conservative, close to Spain's Vox party. Uses third-party campaigns to bypass spending limits, funded partly by Patrick Slim. Ran big ad campaigns for Vox policies.
Board members linked to World Congress of Families, Russian oligarch associates.
It's reported. And they use a U.S. political consultant, Darian Rafi, who claims Trump ties and boasts about micro-targeting, even using mobile data and geofencing in Europe.
Vox in Spain rose fast, using aggressive digital tactics.
Very aggressive things, yeah. Migrant children is a menace. Bypassed old media with emotive digital stuff. Surprisingly popular with young people on Instagram. They're anonymous online boosters compared to InfoWars, Breitbart.
Tapping into a feeling of being left behind.
Isolated by the political system in globalization era, as the book puts it.
And George Soros became a major target for these movements.
A central villain figure, especially for Orban, who was reportedly advised to target him. Framed as this existential globalist plot. Seen in US-UK politics too, targeting Soros's anti-Brexit funding. Echoes crackdowns in Hungary and Russia.
The book calls this a new reactionary internationalism, citing examples like the Italian migrant shooter being praised globally.
Luca Traini, yeah. His name, even on the Christchurch killer's rifle, shows how these ideologies connect across borders.
And Hungary's tactics under Orban, state propaganda against Soros.
Costing millions, apparently. Then consolidating power, limiting foreign universities, NGOs, like Putin did. Brussels didn't do much.
Orban used EU criticism to boost himself domestically.
Played it as defending Hungary.
Mm.
His illiberal democracy message resonated in places frustrated with pure market economics. The migration crisis gave him a global stage,
The book also notes in Italy and Spain, the fascist past wasn't fully dealt with.
allowing neo-fascist groups and symbols to persist openly.
So the key point here is nationalist populism fueled by transnational networks, money, digital tools, culture wars.
All working together to gain power and roll back rights, often targeting common enemies.
Which brings us to the massive question the book tackles. Can democracy actually be saved from all this?
It lays out the scale of the crisis pretty starkly. Electoral rules are not fit for purpose anymore. It's hard to know what information is true. Laws against buying elections are outdated when so much happens outside the rules or via surrogates.
And politicians themselves join in, spreading dodgy info targeting voters secretly. Lawmakers have basically outsourced decisions about democracy's integrity to tech bosses.
That's the charge. And with surprisingly little public outcry. Political scientist Martin Moore's quote is blunt. Our entire democratic system needs to be rewritten for the digital age.
The book sees some responses as inadequate, like mandatory voter ID in the UK.
Yeah, Johnson proposing that. Low impersonation rates, but risks disenfranchising minorities, seen by critics as cynical populism.
And after that dirtiest British election in 2019, not much of a postmortem, even though lots of Tory ads were found misleading.
The book suggests the conservatives kind of profited from the mistrust they helped create.
And it's still easy to get dark money into UK politics. Unincorporated associations, the offshore route via UK voters.
Like the bank's example showed, yeah. Using opaque finance networks linked to the City of London.
Does the book suggest reforms?
It does. Banning donations from non-DOMs or non-tax residents, stopping shell companies donating, barring offshore firms, forcing parties to publish who attends private donor events, like the Leaders Group.
Anything more radical?
Briefly mentions basic income for democracy, giving citizens funds to donate. Meant to bypass dark money, make politicians listen more to voters, but notes it's seen as unlikely.
But huge obstacles to reform exist. Weak regulators.
Described as outmaneuvered, under-resourced, risk-adverse, paper tigers, decisions overturned, investigations limited, law unclear if crime money is even illegal for politics.
Lack of political will. Parties like the status quo they know how to exploit.
That's the argument. They have a vested interest in the current system, flaws and all.
And the political class itself, believing disinformation wins elections.
The book suggests that mentality exists. Fines are small change. Little real costs for dirty habits, shitposting, lying, banning media. Argues politicians won't change without much stronger public demands.
And this is all happening in a wider context. Breakdown of post-war consensus, rise of market fundamentalism promoted by those think tanks.
Yeah, coinciding with the digital revolution, giving tech firms like Google and Facebook unprecedented influence, dominating advertising.
Tech bosses meeting politicians privately. Zuckerberg and Trump. GDPR finds barely a dent.
All part of the picture. And trust in democracy itself is falling, especially among the young. Worrying numbers saying they want a strong ruler willing to break the rules.
Plus a crisis in the UK state itself. Disunited kingdom, unreformed institutions like the city enabling secrecy, close ties between elites, oligarchs, politicians.
Johnson at Lebedev parties, cited as an example.
So the book's warning is stark. Democracy's at a tipping point, like the climate. Disinformation, dark money, polarization could push it past recovery.
That's the chilling message.
But it does end saying it's not too late. A sliver of hope.
A very guarded one, yeah. Which really leaves us wrestling with the core challenge. Democracy is being seriously bent out of shape.
By dark money, opaque networks, digital disinformation, these interconnected global movements, the urgency feels real.
But if it's so easy to funnel money and spread lies in the UK system, and the obstacles to fixing it are so high, weak watchdogs, no political will, a political class seemingly okay with rule breaking.
It really makes you wonder what kind of pressure could possibly come from outside that system to force real change. And what does it say about our democracy when many people in charge just don't seem bothered that the rules are being broken?